Hi, everyone, and welcome, I should say, back to a lot of you to session 3 of Professor David Slocum's series, The Practice of Creative Leadership in 2021. This one is called What Doctors and Lawyers Do and Don't Do, Lessons for Creative Leaders. I'm delighted that so many of you could make it again, and welcome if you're a Berliner, or if you're also not a Berliner, you're very welcome, and we're very excited to have you here. My name is Rose Merrill. I'm the content strategist at the Berlin School of Creative Leadership, and I'm your host today. If you have any technical issues, just ping me in the chat window, better a direct message, then I can deal with it directly with you. After David's talk, we're going to open up the field as usual to questions. You can write your questions in the chat window already as they occur to you, so we'll collect them and then we'll try to get through as many as we can at the end. Please keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, and be advised that we will record this webinar and share it later on our channels. So without further ado, I'm happy to introduce Professor David Slocum once again, the academic advisor to our executive MBA program and its long-standing professor of creative leadership. Over to you, David.
Thank you very much, Rose, and thank you everyone for being here. As I've always considered the Berlin School a big tent, I consider everyone who shows up here a Berliner. Due to your being in a program, due to your contributing to one of our programs, or just because you are in whatever way a kindred spirit. So very glad that you could make it today. This is the third of our sessions on what I'm calling the practice of creative leadership. And this is very much a work in progress. This is an attempt to think through ideas related to the practice of creative leadership that in different ways explore alternatives to existing models, frameworks, or approaches to leadership generally, and the leadership of creative people and creative businesses in particular. I'm going to, as all of you know I want to share my screen and slides, because I just want to be able to review some of what we've done already, because I think today in particular, it's an important prelude to what I want to talk about. And this is somewhat a transitional session in this 6-session series. So allow me to put up this deck. Here we are. So again, the overall series topic and title is the practice of creative leadership. And as some of you know, some of you have been here for the previous 2 sessions, or at least one of the previous 2. We opened talking about leadership as craft. And in that, I explored really this long-standing tradition of craft work and crafts people. This idea of kind of ongoing, very hands-on, active, and experiential learning-driven activity that we associate with handiwork, that we associate with the ways that that beer is made, or the ways in which textiles are produced. My proposal, and really my challenge, was to consider how this sort of experience, this sort of ongoing and active learning process could be applied to leadership. And we explored some of the ways, for example, that leadership as an exercise of the head, the heart, and the hands. And here I'm thinking of Marie with her great work and thinking around leadership of the heart, how those different approaches to leadership could be brought together in a way that perhaps enable or empower creative work in fresh and energizing ways. In the second session, we talked about the inner game of leadership. And here I picked up, of course, on Timothy Gallwey's foundational book, foundational at least in terms of coaching, his book on tennis. And it was written in the early 1970s, so nearly 50 years ago, but still, I think, very helpful to us in understanding that whatever expertise we might have, whatever domain knowledge we may acquire, whatever technical experience we may in fact accumulate, that there's also an inner game involving our own confidence, involving our own ability and willingness to follow through on different activities that what we need to engage in. In other words, this outer game of, for Gallwey, hitting the ball cleanly with our tennis racket, and the inner game of being confident that that swing is going to be exactly the one that we want to make each time the ball approaches us. If that is true for tennis, what does that mean for our exercise of leadership? And part of what we talked about in that session was precisely that oftentimes we are able to acquire as leaders a whole toolbox or skill set of different models, approaches, frameworks that would seemingly be appropriate to given situations, be helpful in addressing given challenges. But because of our own doubts, because of our own tendencies toward procrastination, or our uncertainties about whether we in fact can follow through in appropriate ways in dealing with people, with dealing with clients, dealing with certain problems, we fail, or we are unable to solve problems or pursue opportunities in the way that we want. For both of these sessions, I was trying to gather different aspects of leadership as craft, or the inner game of leadership, as a basis for thinking about this idea of practice. So, for example, the idea of ongoing learning, the idea of very active and experientially based learning as being essential to our work as leaders. And today, in talking about what doctors and lawyers do, I want to draw together some of what we have discussed so far in terms of practice, and both the word and idea being very central to how we want to proceed as leaders. And I will, I'll stipulate and I will apologize because I want to focus on what is a very English and to some extent an American English usage of practice today. I mentioned doctors and lawyers because, as many of you know, there is a practical English language use of the word practice to refer to a business, a medical business that is run by doctors, a legal business that is run by lawyers. They are said to engage in a medical practice or a legal practice. And part of what I want to suggest is that that is not just a linguistic eccentricity, that there is an important meaning to that usage that we as creative leaders can pick up on. So by the end of today, I want to draw together again what it is that we've discussed in terms of practice thus far over these first 3 sessions together, and to think about what a creative leadership practice really turns on. And this is, it won't surprise you to hear, this is much more than talking about a best practice or a proven practice or a novel practice. This is about thinking more deeply about how creative leadership as a practice is a continuous and ongoing process of collective learning and engagement with different areas of shared concern. I'll also say, just in terms of this title, go back, the subtitle here of leadership lessons from professional service firms. I'm going to be making reference to a number of works today that were researched and written in the first decade of this century, the aughts, the 2000s. And this was a time when there was great attention given to the ways that professional service firms were in fact organized and run. And by professional service firms, I mean those firms primarily knowledge-based that deliver services like medical, legal, architectural, or accounting services to clients. And this is important for us because it strikes really at the heart of why the Berlin School of Creative Leadership was itself founded in 2006. It's the idea that a business that delivers a certain kind of service can in fact gain advantage, competitive advantage, creative advantage in the marketplace if the firm is itself managed and led by practitioners of the service that the firm delivers. Put more simply, the idea is that a medical firm is best managed by doctors, or a legal firm is best managed by lawyers. And of course, when Michael Conrad founded the Berlin School of Creative Leadership, his vision was that creative businesses, creative firms, could gain advantage if in fact they were managed and led by creatively minded leaders. This is challenging in all sorts of ways. And you know, the Berlin School was founded, as we all know, with the idea that creatively minded people, those with expertise and experience in producing films or television, in making wonderful advertising, in designing buildings or whatever other objects, that they in fact could gain advantage in the marketplace if they also brought those creative talents and abilities to bear on the organizations, the teams, and the interactions that they had with others. And so I think that it becomes a question for us how now, 15 years later, do we want to consider creative leadership as a practice that allows creative producers to best manage or lead the firms in which they work. It also, just as a quick footnote, it presses us to consider another question, and this is very much present in this other word, profession, that is conveyed in talking about professional service firms. When the Harvard Business School was founded as the world's first business school in 1908, there was a debate that followed really over the first couple of decades of the school's existence about whether business and management was itself its own profession. Was business management comparable to the legal profession or the medical profession? And in different ways, that debate has continued to the present day. And I think for us, this is more than a kind of casual or curious discussion to have. It's a discussion that is very relevant to our thinking about, okay, as creative producers, do we need to learn a completely different profession or set of skills and bodies of knowledge in order to to manage a business successfully? Or as creatively minded people, as creative producers, can we use that creativity as a guide to managing whatever business we need to, in order to bring our creative productions into society and into the marketplace? So again, it's a bit of a footnote, but I find a fascinating one, because it speaks to the debate between those who say, oh, well, as someone who is a creative producer, I can extend that creative production to the organization or team that I lead, versus those creative producers who say, okay, here's my creative production work, and then over here separately is the professional management or leadership work that I do in running my business. So enough of a prelude. There are lots of words here. This has been a kind of gathering of the different takeaways from these first two sessions, and I'm going to come back to this at the end. I just want to flag the first two of these takeaways, and want to emphasize what I bolded here, that so far I would argue that the practice of creative leadership is, as I've said, continuous, deliberate, experientially based learning grounded in actions. In other words, practice is not a simple finite action. Practice is not a step that we take to facilitate interaction in a meeting, or to ease the interactions that we have with clients. Rather, practice is something that needs to be much more ongoing, and allows us to learn what it is that is best going to produce better results for us as a team, as an organization, and as someone who is working to deliver better products or services to a client. And then second, and as I've mentioned already, in terms of head, heart, and hands, believe that practices need to involve reflection and learning from a whole series of different registers of experience. In other words, I've tried to caution that the word reflection is oftentimes too limited to the cognitive or the intellectual. And part of what I wanted to emphasize is that certainly the heart and feelings are central to the learning that practice promises, but action in terms of physical or hand-based action also needs to be built in. And in terms of leadership, as I suggested in the first of our sessions together, I believe that when we talk about physical presence, when we talk about the kinds of interactions that we engage in physically with colleagues or with clients, that these are absolutely crucial to the ongoing practice of leadership, every bit as critical as the kind of cognitive or intellectual understandings we have of problems or of market conditions, or of the, say, the psychological characteristics of those that we're dealing with. There is a very kind of physical, even visceral component to practice that we do well to keep central to our own work. So Again, you've seen this screen before. I would just emphasize the very last of these bullets. I parenthetically reference practice in terms of religion and spirituality, but part of where I'm going to end up today is that this idea of practice, which in terms of yoga, in terms of meditation, in terms of whatever kind of spiritual tradition that we may engage in habitually, whatever activities we may engage in regularly, that these also can be helpful to us when we're thinking about the practice of a profession, when we're thinking and approaching practice as a way of working and of learning as a creative leader. But that's a teaser. So just to dive right in, let's talk about doctors. And you'll see from the dates here, there are a number of references. Boris Groysberg, who teaches the Harvard Business School, did a good amount of research on some of the challenges faced by doctors as leaders of medical practices during the 2000s. And interestingly, I've just put down 5 under this first bullet. And I think for many of us who run, small businesses or even teams or units in larger businesses, addressing the challenges of being a, say, creative producer and a manager or a leader, we're going to recognize this lack of business or management skills to complement the creative production skills that we bring to bear on our work, micromanagement, the unusual necessity of leaving medical production or performance to individuals. Imagine in a medical practice where you have a number of different doctors that each of them may have a specialty, and so the performance of those specialized skills is largely left to individual doctors. They come together more often to receive support on the business side. They want the business end of their medical work to be managed. I'm staying with a friend right now, visiting a friend who he's a neurosurgeon, and he's exactly in this situation where he co-owns a surgery center with 8 different surgeons, all with different specialization. People who work on knees, who work on necks. He works on spines, and each of them, whatever part of the body they work on, they have these intense specializations. And they want to be able to perform in these different areas, but when it comes to the business of making sure that the operating rooms in which they perform surgery are staffed, that there's equipment, that's where they want management and leadership to step in. And I think that tension between being a producer or performer with a particular specialization and being a manager or leader who provides the business support for that performance, something that doctors struggle with in terms of balancing those 2 needs. But that balance of 2 needs is also something that I think creative leaders very regularly confront as well. Creative leaders want, of course, to be able to have the leeway to produce what they feel is creatively appropriate and inspiring and empowering for clients and for larger communities. But they need to do that in a space that is also practically supportive, again, in terms of equipment and financing and so forth. The remaining bullets here lay out, I think, different different aspects of the same challenge. There are structural problems involved. There are kind of practical skills that are required in order to both support the production, but also support a lot of the kind of everyday needs that the medical or again creative producers may require. And the second bullet I would just flag before moving on, and that is involving time management and deliberate learning, because part of what doctors and creative leaders alike face is, to some extent, the schizophrenia, this dual challenge of needing to be both producers and being managers or leaders of a business at the same time, leading two lives within 24 hours in a given day. So part of what I want to just share with you is something that again emerged, I think, very strongly in the 2000s amidst the attention to the doctors leading medical practices, and picking up on Stephen Covey's groundbreaking work in writing about the habits of effective managers. He was trying to come up with different rubrics or frameworks that allowed individuals to better use their time. And many of you know that I'm very much committed to leaders better utilizing what I call our three most precious personal resources: time, energy, and attention. And in terms of time, I think this rubric that Covey introduced that broke different activities of ours into these four quadrants based on axes of urgent, not urgent, important, and not important activities. This is something that I see in my friend who's a doctor, but I also see in very effective creative leaders, those who are able, in fact, to manage or to clarify the priorities in their own use of time very effectively, to understand what is important, what is urgent, and to move forward accordingly. And you see in this breakdown of Covey's four quadrants, you see some of the results that come from overemphasizing any one of these quadrants. And I think that part of what we can learn from the experience of doctors who engage in successful medical practices is, in fact, a very acute and consistent and effective time management practice. You will, I know, be disappointed if I don't recommend at least one book for each of these segments. And so here's a book that I think many of you have heard me recommend. The late Clayton Christensen from HBS wrote a book called How Will You Measure Your Life? And I think that this is an apt book to talk about in terms of this balance between the creative production, the creative work that we're all committed to, and in ways the business or management necessities that we need to engage in order to support and bring that creative production into being, into the marketplace, into society. Part of what Christensen is really compelling us to do in this book is to ask, okay, what is it that we individually can find that's fulfilling in the creative work we do, but also in what might be seen as the more everyday work of ensuring that a business is running efficiently, and a business is being organized in a way that empowers others to bring their creativity forward. So I find this a very inspiring book. It's a short read. There is, in fact, I think in the Berlin School Library, there is a Harvard Business Review version of this longer book. If you want to pick that up and read the article, which is briefer. All right. So the other main profession that I want to reference here is the legal profession and lawyers, who again are often organized into law firms or legal practices that raise some of the same questions and challenges as we've begun to discuss in terms of doctors in medical practices. And David Maister, whom some of you will know, wrote the original trust equation. He did research on professional service firms, again, in the 2000s and even earlier in the 1990s. And he has this wonderful quote, which I've included here, that management challenges in law firms occur not in spite of the intelligence and training of lawyers, but because of them. And I've listed 4 of the professional strengths of lawyers here that help individual lawyers to succeed in terms of serving clients, in terms of winning cases in court. These are professional strengths which at the same time often make coming together and working in groups in law firms very difficult. Lawyers don't necessarily trust each other. They don't trust other people. They have skepticism of abstract principles that might otherwise be used to gather people together. They focus on tasks, not relationships. And they have what we might call maladaptive decision-making, meaning that they are, in many cases, decision averse. They don't want to make decisions because as soon as they make decisions, they can be critiqued, or on the basis of law, they can be criticized. And so they put off making those decisions. Each of these strengths, when it comes to dealing with a law or dealing with a legal case, are in fact weaknesses when it comes to working together well with others, or to gathering in a team or organization. And so I think that part of the challenge here is balancing, again, these professional strengths that serve clients or others, as lawyers, and understanding what are the counterbalancing strengths that lawyers need participating in order to participate in law firms. And I'll just flash down here to the final bullet, which is really the punchline for this effective balance as I see it. And that is to understand that whatever strengths one may have as a lawyer, professional strengths one may have as a lawyer that allows one to serve clients or to serve the law, that those are part of a greater calling that an individual has. And they're not just at the basis of what might be seen as pursuing individual goals, like winning a case in court, or having what might be seen as objective success in earning a lot of money as a lawyer, but rather that one's career as a calling, ultimately has the longer term benefit of speaking to one's own identity and the ability to change and grow one's identity over time. And I think this is important because what it does is it allows one, again, if we've used the word reflect, to reflect on the growth of one's professional strengths, but also to step back more generally and to recognize why one is interested in winning cases, why one is interested in serving clients. Much like a doctor who wants to help a patient to become healthier, to heal, a lawyer wants to serve a client to right a wrong, or to recognize that in the eyes of society, that success means recognizing that that one is being put in a position where there is a financial or institutional recognition of again, a situation being righted. Laura Empson is a wonderful scholar who was at Oxford for years and is now at the Cass Business School in London. And she's written a book on leading professionals, the primary research of which is on lawyers in legal firms. And I was mentioning to Ruth earlier that I think this subtitle may resonate with many of you, where for her, law firms are dominated by power, politics, and prima donnas. And this should resonate for those of us who have worked with power, politics, and prima donnas in creative organizations. That is, having to deal with the creative producers, as well as the more pragmatically minded individuals who allow creative companies to work over time together. I have two more examples, and I want to go through these more quickly. But I want us just to consider management consultancies. Think about McKinsey, think about Bain or the Boston Consulting Group. One of the central ways that these different organizations operate is that, of course, they gather insights from their research on clients, on some clients, and they use those insights in serving other clients. In other words, they pass the insights forward. But in doing so, they have a further opportunity. Not only are they trying to make sense of how best organizations should operate, what strategies or kinds of innovation work in different markets, which organizational structures or cultures are going to be most successful, and so on, as you see, what accounting or auditing practices. They also have an opportunity to take the benefits of that research in other firms and to adopt much of what they see as being most successful and most effective for themselves. So part of what's fascinating to me is to ask, okay, how is it that Deloitte or McKinsey or Accenture take what it is that they see in the work of their clients and to adopt those insights in organizing themselves, or in setting up their own cultures, or in adopting technology for themselves. And I think that there are some wonderful examples here. Some of the work I do, as many of you know, has to do with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that consultancies like Deloitte and PwC have in fact taken a great deal of the insights that they've gathered from many of their clients, and they've adopted many of the kind of the best actions and kind of institutional changes from their clients for themselves. This is, to me, exactly what we're discussing for doctors and lawyers. This is exactly what we're discussing when we talk about, okay, how is it that creative producers can take insights from work that's done in media production or in marketing or in technology and design, and in fact adopt those insights when it comes to their ways of kind of organizing their creative businesses. You'll see Maureen Broderick, who is a consultant herself in London. She's put together a professional service firm, leadership model, which for those of you who know a very old and standard McKinsey 7S model, very much resembles what McKinsey has long advocated for its clients and for its own organizational design. And it seems to me that part of what Broderick is proposing here is precisely that professional service firms can, in an expanded way, take on the kind of learning and adoption of insights from client work that that management consultancies like McKinsey can do more broadly. And here is a book that she's written, which tries not just to be mechanical, but as the title suggests, is about the art of managing and as we would say, leading professional service firms. So lastly, and I'm going to flash through this because I really want to get to the punchline of this session. My interest is in trying to identify how it is that different creative production organizations, and this ranges from architecture to design agencies to what I call, in terms of Netflix, high performance creative company. That is both in terms of content production, but also kind of leveraging technologies. How is it that these creative businesses take whatever it is that they're producing, whatever kind of creative leadership that they are exercising for the marketplace, and embrace and adopt a lot of those insights for themselves? What is it that they learn from their own creative production work and apply that in terms of their own management and leadership? Put more simply, how is it that these companies bring together the creative production work that they do with the creative management or leadership of their businesses? And again, this may seem straightforward, and I've come a long way around to exactly where the Berlin School started years ago. But I think now in 2021, it behooves us to consider, okay, how is it that each of us as creative producers can take what it is that is central to our work in creative production and ensure that that essence, in fact, also informs and shapes the creative management or creative leadership that we engage in. And here, I want to make a final book recommendation. It's called "In Everyone Culture," and it's co-written by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy, who are both the Harvard School of Education. Interestingly, not the Harvard Business School. Keegan is, I think, the most forward-looking thinker and researcher when it comes to adult learning and adult mindsets. Those of you who are fans of Carol Dweck's, those of you who believe in her approach to growth mindsets, I think will find a great deal of helpful material to think about in Keegan and Leahy's work. In two previous books, Keegan and Leahy talk about a laddered system of mindsets that individuals work through in terms of engaging others and in terms of engaging organizations. In this book, they talk about, as the subtitle suggests, developing an organization that is itself committed to deliberate learning, to deliberate development. And this, it seems to me, is key for creative producers who want, in fact, to embrace that essential creativity that they already use in order to enter the marketplace by generating creative products and services, and to adopt those for the management and leadership of their own teams or organizations. So where we end up here is, again, a refinement of our takeaways on the practice of creative leadership. And as some of you may be familiar, maybe you anticipated this in terms of some of what I've been discussing, certainly keying on the word practice. I want to return to the idea that Etienne Wenger proposed in 1991, which is of the idea of a community of practice. And for me, the practice of creative leadership is very much grounded in this continuous, deliberate experientially based learning grounded in actions. But this learning and these actions are in fact necessarily fostered within committed communities. And what I would propose here is that individuals in a team, creative individuals in an organization who want, in fact, to extend this creativity that they otherwise are exercising in terms of creative productions, that they want to extend that to their creative teams or organizations, that they do well to thinking about those organizations as communities of practice, or ultimately as communities of ongoing learning. I won't go on. I've revised each of these bullets from the takeaways that were gathered from the two previous sessions, and I'll make these slides available. But for here, I just want to say that for these first three sessions, this idea of the practice of creative leadership is one that I think I've discussed at a fairly abstract level in ways, despite references to medical firms or law firms. The next three sessions are going to be more practically minded in terms of cycles of innovation and learning, and how it is that individuals, and especially leaders and communities, are involved in continuous sense making and solution making across kind of given situations, and when facing individual problems and challenges. So those will be a bit more concrete than we've been thus far. I do believe, though, that in trying to think through and wrestle with some of these, yes, a higher level or more abstract considerations of practice and of leadership, I hope that they've been helpful in terms of some of the challenges that we all face as creative producers, but also and especially as creative managers and creative leaders. And just as a teaser, next month, this is in fact the fourth session in this series. Again, sense making and solution making, about learning, innovation, and leadership. And I'll use much more grounded examples, but do so shining a light from the considerations of craft, the inner game, and hopefully the helpful lessons of doctors and lawyers that I went through fairly quickly today. So with that, Rose, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I don't know if there are questions or comments that you've gathered, or if others just want to share questions or comments now.
As yet, there are none in the chat window, so we are open for business. Whoever has something pop into their head. A lot to digest there, I'm sure.
A lot to digest, no. And again, I know it's fairly high level or abstract set of considerations. The idea of practice is one which I think in many cases is often reduced to discussions of best practices, of checklists of specific actions, best practices that need to be reviewed and perhaps updated. And part of what I wanted to do, particularly today, is to challenge that by suggesting that when we talk about communities of practice, we want not to consider a practice as a specific action so much as an ongoing way of reflecting on what it is we do in our day-to-day work together, and how it is that we learn from what we do every day.
So Stein has raised his hand. Go ahead, Stein.
Yeah, I have actually, thank you. I have actually tried to sort of connect what you're talking about to sort of my sort of ordinary business day. I won't bore you with all my comments on that, but I think a question I had when you talked about sort of the medical practitioners as being quite individual, and I just thought my business as a movie producer, I work with a lot of sort of talents, a lot of prima donnas, but in many ways they have to work together. Yeah. So dynamics is a little bit different because you have your field of expertise, but and there are sort of possibilities of sub-optimization between them, and some choices can be sort of canceling all the choices, but still you have to work together. And I just wondered if if you had references to that in your sort of medical references, like if it's a big difference between like doctors working separate, or when you have a team doing complicated operations or stuff like that, when you have to work together.
Yeah, it's a good question, and my own belief is that the parallel, Stein, particularly in terms of a production company, say a film or television production company, is that having doctors with different specializations and pursuing those. Again, you have a knee surgeon, you have a brain surgeon, you have a spine surgeon. Those would be individuals. Obviously, they're not going to be working on the same body at the same time, so they're not a team in that way. But they are they're perhaps akin to producers of different commercials or different TV shows, so that there are the separate subgroups built around those individuals. I think the important consideration here is that there are nevertheless values that are shared. Yes, there are financial considerations, and there's a kind of institutional backdrop that allows the right production team to be gathered for each of the shows, in the same way that there is a team that gathers around each surgeon in the operating theater. But there's also a set of values, and there's the financing and operational support that the company provides. I think, for instance, in terms of film and television, the wonderful expression that was used for classical Hollywood, which is that there was a concern less for individual creative producers, as brilliant as they may have been, and the expression was there was the genius of the system. There was the genius of the system that allowed Hollywood studios and the production units for individual films to come together again and again. And it seems to me that individual countries are different in the way that healthcare is organized. But I think, again, the lesson of doctors is that there is a shared sense of certainly making making patients healthy or healing them, but they come together both in terms of those shared values, as well as a kind of common understanding of what the institutional structure or backdrop is going to be. And I think as I'm guessing you would agree, different producers, creative producers, they have different agendas, or they have different expectations when it comes to the institutions that surround them. Some of them are much more in it for the money. Some of them are much more in it for the creative expression. Some of them really want to to be able to develop particular kinds of ideas, and so on. So I think that finding again what I would call kindred creative spirits, that becomes a really important way to develop a common practice in the same way that doctors or lawyers might. Does that help? Does that?
Absolutely, and I saw there was other hands up, so I won't talk too long about that, but it's really relevant for our business, because I think the way we organize this has actually hindered us to grow, because we've been sort of hesitating which way to go and organize that. And yeah, I have some more comments on that, but I'll leave that for later. So I'll listen to someone else.
Thank you, Stein.
Yes, I can't see who was first, so whoever gets to their microphone first, please go ahead and ask your question.
Well, if I may,
Yoshi?
I hope you hear me, or someone else, I don't know.
Go ahead, Ricardo, please.
Yeah,
Ricardo, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you. First, thank you, everyone. Well, it's nice to see you all, and I want to thank David for this series as well, because it's very, very, very interesting and very inspiring. And particularly today, it kind of resonated. I moved away a little bit from the creative industries to teaching right now, and I want to ask if, because I somehow see the same connections that you're making with doctors and lawyers, I can make with teaching. And I realized that in the past months, I've been using all my learnings from the creative, from the Berlin School to teach my students. And I want to hear what's your point of view on that, and also what roles an apprentice plays in that kind of connection between the like I see my students a little bit like as creative producers that are in the process, and I like the idea, or kind of somehow resonated with me the idea of that transferring within the organization, upwards and downwards somehow.
No, Ricardo, thank you very much for that question, and I'm sure Yoshi would agree with me here that this is in ways a really profound question for a lot of educational institutions. Should in fact the leadership of universities or of schools, should that leadership be populated by practitioners? Should that leadership be populated by those who teach and conduct research, or should there be professional administrators? And I think different schools and universities have approached this in different ways. And oftentimes universities in particular, one will find that there's a kind of generational component where teachers and researchers will be very, very immersed in that teaching and research up until a certain age, and then they will, as is often said, take that step into administration where they're not doing as much teaching or certainly as much research, but they have the experience that allows them to hopefully guide a department or school or a university going forward. But I think it's a tremendous challenge, and it's education. I mentioned doctors and lawyers. Those of you who are familiar with journalism, there's a traditional split. It's sometimes referred to colloquially as the split between church and state. Church being journalists who are engaged in the the business of journalism, and state being the business that runs the newspaper or the business organization. And so I think that I don't want to draw too sharp a line between these two sides. And Ricardo, in terms of education, I think there's a good deal of crossover, but there also is a persisting tension there. And oftentimes there are different words or organizational formations which are introduced. An idea, for example, of an educational collective or a design collective, where you have, again, the practitioners who are themselves kind of shaping the institutional form or again, managing or leading the business, as well as the provision of creative service. There's no single answer. I think it depends a lot on the individuals involved, and also the specific goals that those individuals have. And oftentimes individuals will come together because they want to deliver a certain kind of educational experience or a certain kind of journalistic experience, medical, legal, whatever it might be. It requires a lot of work, though, and it's why I emphasize time management the way I did, because to some extent, those who want both to be the creative producers and the creative leaders or managers are pulling double duty. And it requires double the time. However well they're kind of integrating their ways of thinking or feeling or doing in the process. Does that help at all?
Yes, a lot. And I was actually thinking on working on my thesis a little bit around the topic, so I might do some further research, and I think your suggestions were very helpful. I have some of the books actually here next to my bed table. So thank you very much.
Good. Wonderful to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Ricardo. Did you want to ask your question now, Yoshi?
Yeah. Oh, yes.
How's the
David,
time?
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah. I mean, I'm mindful of the time that we have together here, that we're already over the scheduled time. But the Ricardo's point, and then also David, your response to that, we have the word, saying in Japan, it says the indigo dye, indigo or denim dyeing. Guys are wearing like white pants always. And shoemakers is always the worst shoes in the world, right? And so there's always separation between this profession and then what they're really good at and not necessarily at. And related to this, David, I just found it very interesting that for you to go to this practice theory to the leadership. And as you know, in the strategy field, there's also practice done to the strategy, or strategy as a practice, right? And that basically helps us to bring our attention to not just to those small number of people who are actually crafting the strategy in an organization. This is actually everybody's practice, everybody's action is going to be added up to. But it's now known as a strategy, as an emergent kind of type of strategy. So it's sort of like democratizing this act of strategy, right? And so that I think that resonates with what you're saying, is the leadership and then also creativity as a practice, not just for just small number of people in the world is actually being creative, but everybody's being creative and everybody can exercise their own leadership in their own leadership style. And so, but at the same time, you also focusing on this lawyers and doctors And I mean, what you have just discussed right now, the very small, like, you know, the number of people who are practicing that. So how to like, you know, combine these two, or possibly widen the gap between the practice of those small number of people and then the practice as everybody's like an act.
Yes, thank you for that, Yoshi. I think that the easy answer would be tune into the next session, but no, well, the approach, the general approach that I've ended with, that Keegan and Leahy described, this idea of deliberately developmental organization, I think that is, to use your very apt word, a more democratic approach than I've otherwise been discussing. I think that's the direction that I think ultimately responds to what you're raising. There's something that is a built-in challenge here, whether it is in terms of, you know, the surgeon, or as a doctor, or the lawyer who pleads the case in court, or the creative producer who leads a creative team. There's still a hierarchy that exists in many cases, which may inhibit the kind of democratization that I think that you're pointing to. Or, you know, you talk about, you know, strategy as emerging. You talk about an overall team or organization moving forward together, and you know, depending on the situation and the individual or you know, organization, that may be more focused on a particular creative person or creative producer, rather than the creative collective. And I think that remains a great challenge. I don't have a ready answer for that, except to say that I think in many cases, team leadership and collective leadership is one step toward democratization. In other words, if there are these two poles of having the dynamic, charismatic, visionary, creative producer and leader, and the other pole is having a very democratic, creative collective, I think that between those two extremes, there are a number of different possibilities. Maybe, for example, drawing from medical firms, where you have a number of different surgeons with different specialties. They have a kind of shared leadership that is not so hierarchical amongst themselves, their peers, even if the nurses and the physician's assistants and the technical assistants are broadly speaking in a hierarchy below them. So I think you're exactly right that becomes challenging to democratize fully the kind of the full range of individuals who are engaged in again, what Keegan would call a deliberately developmental organization. But for me, having kind of shared leadership or collective leadership is a critical first step. I'm a believer, as many people here have heard me say before, in creative team leadership, where individuals either rotate or especially share leadership based on their individual capabilities. in a given team or organization. And I think, again, I'm looking at Stein here, I think that there are wonderful examples from the world of film production where, yes, you have the director, but you also have the producer, and you have the distributor. You may have the star performer, and I think that each of those individuals come together in a whole that is stronger than one might expect from looking at the sum of the parts. And Yoshi, I think, again, in terms of that spectrum, there is a way to move at least gradually and deliberately from that single visionary individual toward a more democratic creative organization by drawing more individuals into a kind of collaboration when it comes to creative leadership as well as creative production.
So the collective leadership, collective creativity as well, right? And then also distributed creativity, how to manage that, especially under the current context, is becoming so critical for the leadership to be required for that.
Exactly, and I think that again, this is not an unfamiliar book recommendation or citation, but I think from the last decade, one of the essential books on creative leadership by Linda Hill from HBS on collective genius. I think that in many ways, when she talks about collective genius, of course she's talking about creative production. But she also is referring to creative leadership, and in a way, using examples. Her second author, Greg Brandow, spent time at Pixar, and she there's a good discussion of Pixar in that book. She's trying to draw those two different sets of activities together, where the production and the leadership work in tandem. And so I think that, again, they are not the same. The individuals are not always the same, but there are critical overlaps. And so I think that, again, figuring out for specific organizations and kind of specific goals that an organization might have, that there are certainly kind of different ways to draw together both the creative production and the creative leadership work. Stein, please.
Yeah, and since you looked at me, I just want to affirm that the movie production industry is quite. This is highly relevant and highly interesting for my business, because, as you say, you will build up an organization around the project, which will have at least, and I mean, there's so many managerial sort of leadership sides with these projects. You have two leaders. You have a creative leader and an administrative leader in one project, with the director and the producer. You don't have a creative producer. You actually share the responsibilities for leading a project between the administrative side and the creative side. So that's one thing. And then you have the hierarchy, but you also have a high level of collaboration. But then I think another big challenge for movie production is how you organize the studio. If you don't think about the project base, but you think about the studio, is because the studio can also be some sort of individual creative producers working alongside, but they could actually work independently any day, but for some reason they have the same office, and that's why I think it's so difficult to get to make a difference as a studio. I think it's difficult to get sort of real gains from sort of cost gains or creative gains when you get these people together. And we have tried right now. I actually hired a person today, so this is so relevant for me. I hired a producer, and that's the first time we've done that for a long time. And we've organized it now so that it's almost like you have and that's relevant also with what you said about sort of learning from your clients, because we've done something like almost doing a core business, which is the producers, and then you have the business support center almost. You know, you have a crew of people that are not really directly hierarchically sort of reporting to these creative producers. They are actually reporting to me. I lead them, and they are in their expertise, areas of expertise, they are superior to the creative producers. They will tell them that, you know, you cannot do this, you have to do that, on sort of the administrative side. And then, but still the creative producer will be able to sort of run his or her projects. And we even try to sort of find a way to do that a little bit more collectively. So I think it's and not being able to really crack that and really find the right persons to do that together with us has been the real reason for not changing our business for a long time. Because if you look at how those studios do that, it's usually by sort of having one head creative producer and executive producer, and then you have a lot of individual producers working sort of totally individually, or you just have individual producers and no sort of main person on top. And business like that, you can break up any day, and they could work individually any day. You know, you don't really build some kind of value, what do you call a structural value, if you do it like that. And I think that's highly interesting to what you're saying. And I have one comment also to talking about sort of if you have to sort of be a doctor to lead doctors, which is also of course relevant to me. And I think, you know, one side of that is, of course, you need to understand what you lead. And I guess that's a problem with so many hospitals today. I have my wife is a midwife, so I know. But then on the other hand, you also need to gain respect from the people you lead. I mean, to be able to lead, you have to have their respect in some way. And I think one thing I've learned through my work is that I can never be a better director than the directors I work with. But I find that they respect me more if they see I master some sort of creative craft. It doesn't have to be relevant either, you know, it can be playing an instrument, but it could also be being really good at writing press releases, or, you know, something that they cannot, something which is the right side of the brain, that they understand that, you know, you have that side as well. You can understand and sympathize with the kind of challenges and the kind of work they need to do, which I think is important.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that. I know that we're over time. I would just conclude by saying that, you know, Linda Hill talks about the, you know, creative paradoxes in collective genius, and she talks about the central paradox being between unleashing and harnessing. And in you know, for her, this means many things, but among them, it's unleashing this kind of individual creativity, while also harnessing the outputs of that creativity for whatever collective enterprise. And I think that that's something which both on the what I've been referring to as the creative production side, as well as the creative leadership side, becomes a great challenge, but also a great opportunity. How it is that how we, for individual production projects, for example, we're able to inspire and enable individual to gather and to be creative, while also being able to harness the outputs of their creativity in a way that serves the greater project. I think that's enormously challenging. And I can't help myself. I'll just mention, you know, Bill Fisher, the former president of IMD in Switzerland, wonderful management scholar. He used to talk about something that he called virtuoso teams. Virtuoso team is a team of really extraordinary individual creative producers. And for him, this was both a great opportunity and a great challenge. How, for example, did the technical team that was gathered to support the Apollo moon landing. How was that team led? Here are people who are absolutely the best people in their field. And to your point, Stein, you would have a team leader who was basically being asked to lead people who knew absolutely the most about their respective fields. Creative, yes, in this case, very, very technically advanced. And part of what Fisher argued was that, exactly as you're saying, that the leader needed to have a specific area of knowledge or creative capability that was unquestionable. But it was not a creative capability that was necessarily greater than the capabilities of all the other members of the team. He or she just needed to have that certain area, so they were recognized as a peer in whatever way. But the real opportunity that those leaders had was to say, okay, I understand in my own area what it means to be very creative, to be very capable. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm not going to try to drive you to work well in the field that I know best. I'm going to step back, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help you. Here's Hill's word. I'm going to help you to unleash your technical or your creative capabilities as fully as possible. And it seems in many cases that's a challenge, because there's ego involved, and individual creative leaders, they want a team or a production unit to be able to work in ways that they fully understand, or here's that leadership watchword, areas that they can control. And instead, being open to allowing everyone on their creative team to flourish, that becomes an enormous opportunity. But it's one that is challenging to a lot of people, because it's not a process, again, that they can control or direct in ways that oftentimes their egos or their experiences would suggest. So I think part of what you're getting into, Stein, is very much the realm of ego and of psychology, where when it comes to creativity, individuals, especially very capable and experienced ones, have specific creative visions. And stepping back from those individual creative visions and allowing a more collective or shared vision to emerge, that becomes really difficult. It becomes very difficult to enable a group to come together and produce something, again, that is potentially greater than what each of the individuals working alone would be able to produce. With that, I know we're way over time. I appreciate everyone's your patience and your great questions and comments. And again, you're helping me here, because I've been in this series working aloud, as we say, and trying to develop some further understanding of the practice of creative leadership. And I'm also taking notes with your wonderful questions and comments. And advancing some of the initial thoughts that I had and shared with you. With that, I mentioned April 8th, where we're going to have our next session, sense making and solution making. And if you recognize maybe sense making innovation, those of you who know Sarah Beckman from the US module, I'm going to be sharing some work that she and I have done in a book project that we've been working on now for quite a while, that I'm very excited about, and again, I think will provide a more grounded and practical way of understanding some of the considerations that we've been discussing thus far. I also want to just flag two other dates for you to save upcoming. I've been holding monthly future talks Started with Carsten Rosner, the new Berlin School CEO, and then had some of the wonderful Berlin School team, Jackie, Gerardo, and Raisa, in February. Next Tuesday, I'm going to be talking to another old friend of ours, Professor Paul Verdun, Professor of Business Strategy. And he and I are going to be talking about a number of different issues, actually picking up on one of the ideas which Yoshi raised about how business strategy can move forward as a more collective enterprise and activity, which I know Paul is very interested in. And those of you who know him, I think you can also expect safely that he will talk about value creation and value capture, and also talk a good deal about his current research on error management. So I always enjoy greatly and learn a lot from Paul, and I think you will too if you have time next week. And then on March 25th, the third session in the parallel webinar series that we're offering on doing business in China, Professor Doug Guthrie will be back. And so I would urge anyone who has been following that, and even if you haven't, he will, I'm sure, recap what's happened in the first couple of sessions, both his historical and cultural overview, and from session 2, his work on political economy, to talking about some of the very specific current political challenges related to doing business in China, either for those businesses already there or for new market entry. If you are a business leader considering the China market today. So with that, again, way over time. I will do better with my own time management for session 4, but greatly appreciate your time, and again your terrific comments and questions. And I will turn things back over to Rose.
Hi, David. Yes, I also actually really appreciated that we were able to take this time. I think it's wonderful to have a longer conversation and dive into some of these questions and not feel rushed off stage. So thank you for making the time. From my side, it was not an issue, and perhaps we can do that in future as well. Let's see how people feel. But again, thank you all for coming, and we hope to see you on April 8th. In the meantime, we'll send you the recording of the webinar and the slides so you can deep dive back into this topic, which I found very dense but exciting. So I think it will help to have the slides and slowly absorb them. Yes, and reach out to us at community@berlin-school.com if you have any questions or comments, and follow us on our social media channels to keep up to date on when the next events are happening. And feel free to share them with your friends. As we mentioned, this is a public event, so let's spread the word.
Great. Thank you, Rose, and thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.